Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Archana Solanki. Here are the headlines we're tracking this evening. Nifty and sensex snap an 8-day winning streak to end with marginal losses. Financial stocks and mid-caps buck the trend to end in the green. India's exports rise nearly 7% in August. Shipments to the US see a sharp spike just before the 50% tariffs took effect. Imports declined by 10%. Trade deficit narrows to just over $26 billion. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick criticizes India for not opening up its farm products market to America, says India put up a wall against imports while freely selling everything to them. Indian officials to hold talks with USA's chief negotiator in Delhi tomorrow. India-EU FTA talks are in a sweet spot, say government sources, and they are on track to be concluded by year-end. The next round of talks have been scheduled in Brussels between the 6th and the 10th of October. Sources say that EU green-lighting fisheries exports from India may offset the losses due to higher US tariffs. The Supreme Court refuses to stay the Waqf Act in its entirety but limits the powers of district collector, caps the number of non-Muslim board members at 3, stays the provision which mandates a person must be a practicing Muslim for 5 years to create a Waqf. Supreme Court appointed SIT says Reliance Foundation-run animal rescue and care facility Vantara is in compliance with current laws, states no violation observed in the animal acquisition process. The apex court says a detailed order will be passed later, adds there are some things which are the pride of our country. Delhi police arrest the driver of a BMW car that mowed down a bike, killing an official of the Union Finance Ministry and injuring his wife. The woman driving the BMW has been charged with culpable homicide. Israel steps up the Gaza offensive. 25 people, including children, killed in overnight strikes. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio meets Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu to discuss the fallout of the bombing in Qatar. 15-year-old Owen Cooper becomes the youngest winner at the Emmys as Netflix drama Adolescence wins 6 awards. Apple TV comedy The Studio breaks records to win 13 awards. HBO's The Pitt wins the Best Drama Series and 2 acting awards. All right, let's start with the day's market action. Sensex and Nifty snapped an 8-day winning streak, ending the day with marginal losses. Nifty remains above the 25,000 mark. Mid-caps outperformed the blue chips with the index ending in the green. Nifty Bank Index also managed to hold its head above water. It was a mixed day for stock markets across Asia. Data from China shows the economic slowdown is deepening. Retail sales mixed expectations and industrial output slips to a one-year low. Shares in China declined in trade. South Korea's Kospi hit a record high after the country scrapped a plan to raise taxes on stock investments. Back home, wholesale price inflation turned positive in August after 2 straight months of deflation. WPI stood at 0.52% compared to negative 0.58% in July. The government said the uptick was driven by an increase in prices of food products, manufacturing equipment, mineral products and transport equipment. The free trade agreement talks between India and the European Union are on track to be concluded by the year end. We learned from government sources that negotiations are in a sweet spot and the early harvest deal option remains open. Now, the next round of talks have been scheduled in Brussels between the 6th and the 10th of October. Sources say that EU's listing of new Indian fisheries for exports may offset losses faced by the sector due to US tariffs. The two sides concluded the 13th round of talks in New Delhi last week. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal will visit the UAE from the 17th of September for 2 days. Government sources tell CNBC TV18 that he will meet his counterpart and expedite work on Bharat Mart Trade Hub. The visit also aims to explore ways to improve access to African markets. The United States and Chinese officials are in talks for a second day of trade talks in Spain. The agenda includes tariff rates, export controls, and the looming deadline for Chinese-owned social media platform TikTok's divestment. The latest talks in Madrid mark the 4th round of bilateral meetings in the last 4 months. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has urged the European Union to impose stronger sanctions on Russia to match America's pressure.
Doing the job. NATO has to get together. Europe has to get together and do it. Look, Europe they're my friends, but they're buying oil from Russia. So we can't be expected to be the only ones that are, full bore. But Europe is buying oil from Russia. I don't want them to buy oil. And the sanctions that they're putting on are not tough enough. And I'm willing to do sanctions, but they're going to have to toughen up their sanctions commensurate with what I'm doing.
Russia launched 87 drones and missiles on Ukraine in an overnight strike. Ukrainian defense forces said they shot down or intercepted 59 drones. This comes a day after Russia claimed to have intercepted over 360 Ukrainian drones in a day. Now, Ukraine struck over one of Russia's largest oil refineries in the Leningrad region. Meanwhile, Romania has summoned Russia's ambassador after a Russian drone reportedly entered its airspace. Crude oil prices edged higher after Ukraine attacked Russian oil refineries. US President Donald Trump's call for NATO nations to stop buying Russian oil also supported prices. Brent gained over 2% last week and is hovering just over the $67 per barrel mark. Meanwhile, gold remains steady near the all-time high of $3,650. This as traders priced in a 25 basis points rate cut from the US Federal Reserve next week. Now, Danish multinational brewer Carlsberg is exploring an initial public offer of its Indian arm. Money Control has reported that the company has kick-started initial discussions with potential advisors. Carlsberg has been exploring an India listing for the last 2 years. However, the size of the listing and the valuation are not known as of yet. Flipkart Internet, the e-commerce marketplace arm of Flipkart, has narrowed its loss on standalone basis to nearly 1,569 crore rupees in FY25. As per data accessed by Toffler, its standalone revenue jumped by 14% to 20,746 crore rupees. However, its total expenses for the fiscal stood at over 22,300 crore rupees. Meanwhile, Myntra's profit after tax recorded a jump of more than 1,600% from a year ago to 548 crore rupees. Its revenue also climbed 19%. Shares of Vodafone Idea rallied in today's trade. This after reports said that the Supreme Court will hear the telecom operator's plea on additional adjusted gross revenue dues on September 19th. Vodafone Idea had moved the court seeking to quash Department of Telecom's additional demand of AGR dues worth 9,450 crore rupees. It urged a recalculation of dues. Shares of rice exporter KRBL fell as much as 12% after an independent director on the company's board resigned, citing corporate governance issues. This is the biggest single-day drop that the stock has seen in over 3 years. The independent director, Anil Kumar Chaudhary, cited issues that have persisted despite efforts to address them, which posed professional and ethical dilemmas. However, the company's CMD, Anil Mittal, has maintained that the independent director's allegations are false and baseless.
It was finally decided in the board meeting that we are going to have external auditors to vet the allegation made by Mr. Anil Chaudhary. And it will take about 30 days' time to go into the details of those allegations. And there are about 6 or 7 allegations made by him. And I think so that things will come in a transparent manner after 30 days. According to me, only one director has made those type of malicious allegation, which according to me, as a management head, I would say it's all wrong. They're all false.
The Supreme Court has refused to stay the Waqf Amendment Act in its entirety. However, the Apex Court stayed certain provisions of the Act. The court has stayed the provision which mandates a person must be a practicing Muslim for 5 years to create a Waqf. The top court has limited the powers of District Collector. Ashmit Kumar has more on this. Ashmit.
Well, an important order this as far as the application of the Waqf Act is concerned. Bear in mind, a whole host of petitions had been filed. The petition had been seeking a stay as far as the Waqf Act is concerned. Now, the Supreme Court has made a couple of clarifications. Number one, it said that the whole Act, there's no question of staying the whole Act, that it happens only in the rarest of rare cases. But having said that, there are a few troublesome provisions that the Apex Court has seen fit to grant an interim stay for now. What are these provisions? Well, number one, there was a provision of the Waqf Act which said that no property can be given as Waqf, can be donated as Waqf unless the person donating that property has been practicing Islam for 5 years or more. That provision was a contentious one, flagged by the petitioners, now stayed by the apex court. The second was a provision which granted a government officer the authority to decide whether or not a property is either a government property or a Waqf property. And if found to be a government property, that officer was granted the authority to de-recognize the Waqf property. That was, again, another contentious provision flagged by the petitioners. That's for now been granted stay off by the apex court. Another aspect, another key consideration was the status of Waqf properties. The Supreme Court has given an important clarification that the status of Waqf properties will not change unless there's a specific and final order that has been passed by the Waqf Tribunal. This is number three. Number four was the composition of the Waqf Board as well as the Waqf Council. This amended act that had been passed by the Parliament had provided for non-Muslims also to be a part of the Waqf Council as well as the Waqf Board. To that end, the Supreme Court has granted the protection that from the Waqf Council, which has 22 members, not more than 4 can be non-Muslims, and the Waqf Board, which is 11 members, not more than 3 members will be non-Muslims. And not just that, the Supreme Court has also said that while it's not passing any binding direction on the CEO of who should be the CEO of the Waqf Board, what the Supreme Court has said is that as far as possible, the person should belong to the Muslim community. Back to you.
Right. Thank you, Ashmit, for that. Moving on, the Supreme Court orally observed that a special investigation team has found that the acquisition of animals by Reliance Foundation run Vantara is in compliance with the law. The court said that the team appointed by the apex court found no wrongdoing when it probed various allegations, including whether there has been a compliance of all laws of acquisition of animals from India and abroad. The Supreme Court said that a detailed order will be passed later. The two-judge bench also highlighted, and I quote, certain good things should be allowed to happen to the country. Now, shifting focus now, Delhi police have registered a case of culpable homicide a day after a senior finance ministry official died when a BMW hit his motorcycle. Police have arrested Gaganpreet, the woman who was allegedly driving the BMW. 52-year-old Navjot Singh worked as a deputy secretary in the finance ministry. His wife sustained minor injuries in the accident. Gaganpreet's husband, who was in the car with her, has also been named in the FIR. Police say the speeding car lost control while trying to overtake. And time for a short break. Coming up next, 3 months since the Air India crash in Ahmedabad, a US law firm is preparing to file lawsuits in the UK and the US. Madiha Mujawar will join us after the break.
Welcome back. September 12th marked 3 months since the tragic crash of Air India flight AI-171 in Ahmedabad, which claimed 260 lives. Investigation is underway, but the preliminary report by the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau blamed the movement of the fuel control switches from run to cut off as the reason for the crash. However, the preliminary report does not disclose whether they moved inadvertently or manually. While the interim compensation of 25 lakh rupees has been paid to many families, questions remain about accountability, safety lapses, and the promised 1 crore rupees to each deceased by the Tata Group that has yet to be released. While the final report is still awaited, a separate legal battle is unfolding overseas where US-based law firm Beasley Allen is representing families in potential claims against Boeing. Joining us now is Mike Andrews, senior aviation attorney with Beasley Allen. Mike, thank you very much for joining us. Let me begin by asking you, how many families have joined you so far in pursuing legal action outside India after the AI-171 crash?
Currently, we represent the families of approximately 110 victims, and that's a mix of people who were on the aircraft as well as those who were on the ground.
Mike, what kind of compensation these families have received so far? Could you tell us what these families are telling you?
So far, many of the families are receiving the compensation, the interim payment from Air India. But so far, few, if any of those, have received any money under the Tata Fund. We understand that That fund was registered last month, and they anticipate beginning to make payments sometime, hopefully this month. But so far, those payments have not been forthcoming.
All right. Mike, you've also been meeting several families in Ahmedabad. You were here last month, and Ahmedabad and elsewhere, also in Gujarat. What kind of difficulties are they sharing with you right now, both financially as well as emotionally?
Well, obviously, because the families and the victims cut across all socioeconomic groups, both on the plane and on the ground, they are met with a host of varying problems and difficulties. For example, in many cases, the primary breadwinner was lost in the household, which creates enormous financial difficulty. And as an example, I can tell you that in one case, at least, an elderly woman, a mother, who was depending on her adult son to help provide for her medical care. When he was killed on the crash, obviously that source of income stopped for her. And so she is very concerned and is bedridden, concerned about how her future medical care will be taken care of. You also have children who have lost the ability to have their education, health, and housing paid for over the loss of the primary breadwinner in the household. So you have financial and economic difficulties on top of the pain, suffering, grief, and loss that these families have gone through.
Right. Mike, we understand your team has filed a FOIA request in the US for the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder. Where does that process stand? And if you don't get the data, what's this next step for you then?
Right. So the FOIA, or the FOIA request, is a Freedom of Information Act request that's available, something that we do routinely in the United States. Regulatory agencies and the government have prescribed time periods to respond to those. Typically, it's about 20 days that they have to get a response. Now, I will tell you that we did receive an acknowledgement that the FOIA request had been received, but as of yet, we've received no actual substantive data in response to that. So to fully answer your question, what can we do if they fail or refuse to respond? There are procedures that we can go to try to enforce the FOIA. In some cases, the regulatory agencies can continue to delay and use, I hate to say excuses, but as rationale for not producing information, say things like the investigation is ongoing and we can't produce anything at this time. But in the event that we are completely stonewalled and no information is produced, when and if lawsuits are filed, we can then hope to avail ourselves of the court system to enforce production.
All right. What is your assessment of the preliminary crash report released by India's AAIB? Did it answer questions or did it leave more doubts to your mind?
Yeah, the preliminary report actually created and caused more questions than it provided answers. As you know, the preliminary report included information that was highly decontextualized, taken out of context, included snippets of information about the fuel switches, for example, and sort of a very choppy, not really continuous timeline of events that happened during the crash. As a result, people were left to speculate whether or not pilots may have intentionally caused the crash by turning the switches off. We don't think that narrative is correct, first of all. And we think it's unfair and premature to jump out and blame the pilots when certainly very little is known regarding the data on board this crash. We know that looking at video evidence and some of the information that we've been able to obtain, it appears that the ram air turbine, the RAT device, deployed very, very early, probably prior to these issues with the fuel switches. Now, that is an indicator to us that there are other issues on board the plane that have to be examined, which leads us to our knowledge and review of documents from both the FAA and Boeing regarding other potential issues on the 787.
Right. Mike, Beasley Allen is also carrying out its own investigation. So how far along are you and what exactly are you looking into?
That's correct, and we are making progress there. We're working with a number of sources and experts to gather as much information as we can. One of the things that we are aware of is that several years ago, the FAA and Boeing began to issue a series of airworthiness directives and bulletins, and certainly Boeing documents, lengthy, extensive Boeing documents that indicate that there are leaks in certain water couplings on board the 787. The leaks are in areas which can affect the EE bays, and those are electronic equipment bays in the front and rear, or at least the aft section of the 787. As an example, I can show you one of the documents, if you can see this very well. But what it indicates is that in the front, this is a Boeing document that was available online, you have an EE bay front and aft, which essentially will be in these areas of the aircraft underneath the cockpit, and then right in a line, according to the documents at least, behind the trailing edge of the wings. And so what the documents speak to is couplings and water lines that can leak in those areas. The documents are pretty extensive and go on to show specific areas on board the aircraft in which those couplings are located, and then even further, how to access the couplings and how to replace them and what to replace them with. Now, we have been able to obtain what we think are exemplars of some of these couplings. The way we understand these are intended to work is that when two lines come together, this is a clamshell coupling that fits around the lines and simply clips together around those lines. One of the things we're looking at is whether it can appear to be latched and not actually latched, which in this case it is. As you can tell, it stays closed, but it's not actually completely latched. It just sort of holds itself together. You're supposed to pinch it further to cause it to completely latch, but then it can also become unlatched again. As we understand it, there is a shroud, a protective covering over the water lines and these couplings that when that shroud or covering is installed can somehow interfere with or perhaps cause these latches to become unlatched and open up. When that happens, according to the documents, it looks as if water leaks can occur in areas over wiring bundles and into electronic equipment bays, causing some of the computer equipment to become wet. That creates other issues because we are aware that there are autonomous or largely autonomous systems on board the aircraft that can cause unintended or uncommanded inputs to flight controls.
Very important point there, Mike. But since neither Boeing nor the FAA has issued any fresh warnings on the Dreamliner planes after this crash, if the black box doesn't give you enough to build a case, what next then for you?
Our plans will be to continue to work with our experts to develop whatever theories may be applicable to what happened here, because again, we anticipate the flight data recorder is going to contain a much more complete digital record of the power, of the settings, of the various warnings that the pilots may have had inside the cockpit at the time. And certainly the primary focus will be the timeline of the deployment of the RAT device and what initiated that deployment, because that to us is crucial to understanding what is happening here in the electrical system.
All right, Mike. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll continue to track both the official probe in India and your firm's legal efforts abroad. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining CNBC TV 18 and sharing details with what is happening about the lawsuit that you're preparing against Boeing. With that, it is a wrap on this edition of Business 360. More news and updates continue right here on CNBC TV 18.